Reddit's one of those websites where somebody's usually going online to the search bar and typing something in, like a question they have, like, why do my balls hurt? And it'll give you a thread with people who answer questions and that kind of thing. But there are some people that are on Reddit that are full-time just weirdos, and they post some of the weirdest things. So today we're going to get into some of the weirdest, creepiest, eeriest Reddit threads to ever hit the surface of the internet. r/confessions. I murdered someone. This happened a good number of years ago, and at the time I was a pretty high up drug dealer, moving a good amount of ounces. I wasn't El Chapo, but I had my power, money, and respect. I had a girlfriend of a few years. She ended up getting pregnant, and a couple months after my child was born, she left me. I was destroyed. At the time, I had a mental disorder that made this breakup unbearable, and I was a mental wreck, and my anger was at an all-time high. There were groups of days where I would be fine, not even feel the need to text her, but then there were the times where I was so angry because she left me. How could she leave me when I did so much for her? That my anger would become uncontrollable, and when you have a drug dealer mentality, it can get pretty scary. I never laid a hand on that woman, but I found out that she was hanging out with someone who was supposed to be a good friend of mine, and they started dating. I still remember the exact feeling of seeing a picture of my ex, my good friend, and my child all together. I destroyed my entire house in a blackout rage and basically went off the deep end. The anger was uncontrollable. Something evil happened inside of me that day, and I just had to do it. One night, I decided to throw a party in a venue in town and invited said friend so I could talk to him. He was very hesitant at first, but I told him I wanted to just make amends and we could all get along. He came through and we sat down and I talked. I acted real good to him and I had him fooled and everything was okay. I asked him if he wanted to go out back and do some great cocaine. He agrees. What he didn't know was that this wasn't just cocaine. It was a 50-50 cut of cocaine and fentanyl. He fell almost immediately after doing a decent-sized line when we were in a pretty discreet location, so it took about 7 minutes before I went inside and yelled to someone, "Call 911." By the time the ambulance got there, he was dead. I put the bag of in his pocket before coming back inside and getting the ambulance. I told the police that if he asked, I wanted to go do a line, and he agreed. He did the first line and fell out, and that's all I knew. I didn't know what happened, nobody ever thought anything of it past it, and I was never hassled about it after that situation. End of story. This Reddit thread is about the original Night Stalker. So the original Night Stalker, his real name is Joseph James DeAngelo. He was an American criminal who committed at least 13 murders, 51 rapes, and 120 burglaries across California between 1974 and 1986. Now, this Reddit thread is a link to an audio clip of him talking to someone's answering machine after he had assaulted or murdered somebody. Now, this lady had survived the attack and brought this to the police, but it was years later, so no one understands why she did that or if she didn't know if she had the clip. Now, we're going to get into that clip here, and I just want you to listen and try to understand some of the things he is saying. So this was all happening in the early 1970s. Now, from 1970 till about 2018, no one knew who this man was, who was committing the crimes. And like I said, he got away with a lot of murder, burglary, and other horrendous acts. Now, on a Tuesday night, April 2018, he was found as the prime suspect and arrested. Another little creepy fact about this man is that on April 6th of 2001, one day after an article in the Sacramento Bee linked the original Night Stalker and the East Area Rapist, a victim of the rapist received a call from him, and he asked, "Remember when we played?" He was really known for doing these weird, creepy things. Like I said, like leaving messages or sending letters talking to his previous victims and just toying with them. Now, mind you, he was also a cop back in the early days, so it was much easier for him to get away with these things, and DNA testing and investigation was not as good as it used to be. For an example, the Zodiac Killer, he was still never found, no one knows who he was, and it was so long ago that they just did not have the technology to catch these people. Now, luckily, Joseph was caught and was able to give closure to the families of the victims and things like that. With that being said, I would really encourage you guys to go read the subreddit, do a little research into the story because it is insane. There's so many twists and curves and things that I just can't talk about on here due to NSFW. But now that that is over with, let's get to the next Reddit thread. Hey guys, so I gotta tell you about this insane camping trip me and my friends and I went on recently. We were all 18 and thought it would be a blast to do some off-grid camping in the woods. We found this super creepy old cabin deep in the forest, and being the thrill seekers we are, we decided to spend the night there. Big mistake. As soon as night fell, things got seriously creepy. We all heard sorts of strange noises, rustling in the bushes, branches snapping, you name it. At first, we thought it was just animals, but then it started sounding more human. We laughed it off, but deep down, we were all kind of freaked out. When we finally went inside to the cabin to crash for the night, that's when things went from creepy to downright terrifying. The air felt super heavy, and there was this weird chill that seemed to follow us everywhere. And then we started hearing footsteps outside. Slow, deliberate footsteps that sounded like they were coming closer and closer. We tried to ignore it, telling ourselves it was just our imaginations running wild. But then we heard it, a child's voice calling out our names from the darkness. I swear, I've never felt more scared in my life. We locked the door, but the voice kept calling out, getting louder and more sinister with each passing minute. We stayed up all night, clutching onto each other for dear life, waiting for the morning to come. And when it finally did, we bolted out of that cabin so fast you wouldn't believe it. We didn't even look back. We just ran until we were back to our cars safe and sound. I know this sounds crazy, but I swear this actually happened. We're all still trying to process it, but one thing's for sure, we're never going back to that cabin again. Has anyone else ever had a similar experience? We could really use some advice on how to deal with this. Stay safe out there, guys. I received a frightening phone call at the hospital I worked at, and it came from a room which had no phone hooked up. I never went on that wing of the building ever again. I worked as a transporter in a hospital. About 2 years ago, we moved from the old city hospital into a new state-of-the-art facility. The old hospital was built in the 1930s and was showing its age, and at night it was just plain creepy. Each floor had an east and west wing. The east wing on the 4th floor was the first wing to be shut down about 2 weeks before the move. One night at around 9:30, I'm up on the floor to get a patient from the west wing. I see a small group of nurses and aides who all used to work on the now closed east wing. They looked visibly shaken. I walked over to see if everything was okay. They told me they had decided to walk through their old wing for nostalgia's sake. When they were over there, the phone at the nurse's station started ringing. The computers and phones had not yet been moved. Not sure what to do, one of the nurses reached over the counter and answered the phone. The nurse told me there was a woman's voice on the other end and that she sounded confused. This is the conversation as best as I can remember it. End quote. "This is blank. How can I help you?" asked the nurse. "Hello? Who is this?" "This is blank. I'm a nurse. Is there anything I can help you with?" "Where am I?" "This is the hospital name." "Are you a patient here?" "Oh, okay." Then the line went dead. End quote. That's when the nurse finally looked at the screen of the phone to see where the call was coming from. The phone gave the room number directly next to the nurse's station. The room by this point had been all cleared out, and the phones removed. They could see directly into the room and see that there was nobody in there. That's when they bolted towards the west wing where I was getting off the elevator. I avoided that wing for the rest of my time there. End story. A blonde stranger stalked me for months and told me she enjoyed watching me sleep. I live on the 16th floor of my building. This might be really long, so I apologize in advance. I'm a 21-year-old male college student. I go to a school that isn't huge, but is fairly large, about 20,000 students or so. Anyway, my freshman year, 2.5 years ago, I went to my orientation and being kind of an intimidating but socially awkward 6'3" male. I kind of sat in the back of the auditorium to keep to myself. About halfway through, this decently attractive blonde girl sits next to me and leans on the armrest closest to me. She was pretty good looking, so I just ignored it. Then she started staring. I asked her if she needed anything, and all that was said was no. Then started smiling at me. For the next half hour, she stared at me, and I don't think she paid any attention to the presentation at all, just my face. Once the presentation finally ended, we were split into groups to go register for the fall semester. Thankfully, staring girl was put into a different group because she had declared a different major than me. on the other side of the campus since each of the colleges at my school registered in a different building. I thought this was the last time I would see her and her creepy staring, but I was wrong. I finished registering for my classes and went to meet my mom so we could drive home. I walk out the front door, and there, creepy staring girl is, hiding in the bushes. She hops out and walks up to me. Doesn't say a word, just stands beside me. I decided that was enough and left. Fast forward about 4 months. I have all but forgotten about this girl. I move into my dorm, walk out into the hallway, and there she is, standing at the end of my hallway, staring at me. I don't know how she knew what floor I would be on, as there's 15 dorms on my campus. I grabbed my roommate and told him it was time for a freshman get-together. She followed us all the way there. I tried to lose in the crowd, but every time I thought she was gone, she appeared next to me again, never saying a word. After that first night, I didn't see her again for a few weeks. I moved to a different dorm and everything was going great. Hadn't seen Creepy Girl for a while, and class was awesome. So I was sitting at lunch eating alone one day, and all of a sudden, she is sitting across from me. She says the first words she said to me since the day of the orientation. They were, end quote, "Why would you move dorms without telling me? I had to find you again," end quote. At this point, I decided that I was done eating and got up and left without saying a word. She followed me all the way to my dorm, smiling the whole way. But thankfully, she couldn't get in because you have to swipe your ID at the front desk before getting in. The next day, she followed me to class, then stood outside on the sidewalk until I got out, smiling the whole time. She did this every day for weeks. She wouldn't follow me to dinner, never say anything, just smiling. One weekend, I went to Tennessee with my very good friend, who is now my girlfriend. We didn't tell anyone, and we came up with it on a whim on a Thursday night. When I got back, the girl came up to me while I was eating and said probably the creepiest thing ever. It still gives me the chills to this day, end quote. How could you drive to Nashville with that bitch? My first and middle name. I thought you loved me. I'm going to have to do something drastic that I don't want to do, end quote. I had never told her my first name, let alone my middle name, and she had just threatened my friend. So I was more pissed than scared and stood up to my full height and said, "Bitch, listen. I don't know you. You've been following me for weeks. I don't know how you found out where I was or where I went and who I went with. But if you touch any of my friends, I'll make sure you rot in jail for the rest of your worthless life." She started crying and screaming about how she thought I loved her and all this crap. And she made a big scene in the middle of the cafeteria. She ran off once. The security guard came over and I told him what happened. After this, she would randomly show up in the hallway to my dorm or follow me to my classes. One time, she even followed my current girlfriend, who absolutely flipped out on her. Then somehow she got my number and would text me at 3 a.m. every morning how she loved me and that she loved watching me sleep, which was weird because I lived on the 16th floor of my dorm. This continued for about 5 or 6 more months. The last I heard about her, she had tried to commit in one of the dorms by burning her wrist with a hair straightener, screaming about how me and several other guys had ruined her life. I don't know what happened to her after that. She disappeared completely. The extra roommate. I found the listing online. Cheap rent, fully furnished, and close to work. It almost seemed too good to be true. The landlord, Mr. Thompson, was an older man who barely looked at me as I signed the lease. End quote. "It's a quiet place," he said. "Not many tenants. You'll like it." End quote. I moved in on Friday. The apartment was small but cozy. 2 bedrooms, a tiny kitchen, and a living room with an outdated TV. By Saturday morning, I had already met her. Her name was Emily. She was sitting on the couch when I woke up, sipping coffee and flipping through a magazine. "Morning," she said, smiling. "You must be the new tenant." She seemed nice, friendly, but not overbearing. We talked a little, nothing too personal. She told me she'd been living there a while, and that the landlord had rarely checked in. We fell into an easy routine. Coffee in the mornings, TV in the evenings. It felt like I had lucked out with a great roommate. Until I mentioned her landlord. It was a week later. He had stopped by to drop off some paperwork and asked if everything was alright. I casually brought her up, saying how nice it was to have a good roommate. He frowned. End quote. "You're the only one on the lease." End quote. I let out a small laugh. "Yeah, but Emily's been here for a while, right?" His face didn't change. "No one's lived here for months." A cold, creeping feeling spread through my chest. "That's not possible. I talk to her every day." He gave me a strange look. "Are you sure?" I almost asked him to come inside to see for himself, but when I turned towards the apartment, the blinds were shut, The living room light was off, and I suddenly felt foolish. "Never mind," I muttered. "I must have misunderstood." He nodded slowly, then left. I locked the door behind him and turned the couch. Emily wasn't there, but her coffee cup was, half full, steam still rising. I spent the rest of the afternoon convincing myself that I wasn't crazy. There had to be an explanation. Maybe she wasn't on the lease but still lived here. Maybe she was a former tenant who never really left. Or maybe Mr. Thompson was just forgetful. That night I sat on the couch, waiting for her to come back. The apartment was silent. The air was thick with something I couldn't quite name. I checked my phone, scrolling mindlessly, trying to distract myself. Then the bathroom door creaked open. I jumped. Emily stepped out, rubbing her hands on a towel. "You okay?" she asked. I hesitated. "Where were you earlier?" She frowned. "What do you mean?" I swallowed hard. "When the landlord came by, you weren't here." She tilted her head. "I was in my room." Her room, the second bedroom. I have never gone in there. Something about it felt off, like it really wasn't meant to be mine. "Look," she said, sitting next to me. "I know this place is a little weird, but you'll get used to it." "Used to what?" She smiled, but there was something hollow about it. Sharing. A shiver ran down my spine. I tried to shake it off, but when I glanced down at the coffee table, her coffee cup was gone. I never saw her move it. I couldn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening. The apartment was too quiet, like it was holding its breath. Then a soft knock. I sat up, heart pounding. It came from the second bedroom. I wasn't going to answer it, but my feet moved before I could stop them. I crossed the hall and pressed my ear to the door. Silence. I knocked once. "Emily?" Nothing. I turned the knob, the door swung open. The room was empty. No bed, no furniture, just the bare mattress on the floor covered in dust. The air was thick, stale, like no one had stepped inside for years. I backed away slowly, but as I did, I caught something out of the corner of my eye. A coffee cup, sitting in the middle of the floor. Emily's coffee cup. Then, the door slammed shut, and behind me someone whispered my name. I spun around so fast I nearly tripped over my own feet. My back hit the door as I pressed myself against it, heart hammering against my ribs. The room was empty, but I wasn't alone. I could feel it, something just beyond my line of sight. The air was thick and heavy with a presence I couldn't explain. My breath came fast and shallow as I reached for the doorknob behind me. My fingers fumbled, slipping against the cold metal. Then the whisper came again, right next to my ear. "Why did you open the door?" I shoved my way out of the room, slamming the door behind me. My hands trembled as I locked it, as fast as I could somehow keep whatever was inside of me from getting out. I stumbled back into the living room, gasping for air. My gaze landed on the couch. On the spot where Emily always sat, it was empty now, but the impression of her body was still there, like someone had been sitting there moments ago. I turned on every light in the apartment. Then I did one thing that I had been avoiding since the landlord's visit. I grabbed my phone and started searching. There wasn't much. The apartment complex wasn't actually famous, just an old building that had been through several owners, but then I found it. An old newspaper article from over a decade ago. A woman had died here. Her name was Emily. I stared at the screen, my stomach turning into knots. The article was brief, just a small blurb in the crime section. Emily Graves, 26, was found dead in her apartment after neighbors reported a foul odor. Authorities rooted a tragic accident, though details remain unclear. I shut my phone off. My whole body was shaking. I wasn't crazy. Emily was real. But she wasn't alive? I need to leave now. I grabbed my keys and bolted for the front door, my hands fumbling with the lock, my pulse pounding in my ears, but just as I twisted the knob, the TV turned on. Static filled the apartment, hissing and crackling. The screen flickered, shadows dancing around across the walls, and there, in the reflection of the darkened screen, was Emily. She stood behind me, her head tilted, her eyes dark and hollow. "Why are you leaving?" she whispered. My scream caught in my throat. The lights flickered, the air grew thick and cold, then the TV shut off, and she was gone. That's going to do it for today on the Reddit stories. I'd like to say I really appreciate you guys tuning in, liking and all that stuff. I really appreciate it, and I will see you guys in the next one.